Nitrias. Our first speaker in this session is CARMEN TING, a postdoctoral research fellow holding Marie Curie individual fellowship in her project called glaze, coordinated by Lina Kassianidou. CARMEN will be talking about the latest results of her research. In case you don't recognize her, it's her. She has a new haircut. So CARMEN, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you, Lina, for organizing this event again, and thank you for all my colleagues for presenting the very exciting research today, and thank you for all of you who are still sticking around to listen to this talk. And I know it's a very long day for everyone, so I'm trying to make it as interesting as possible and as short as possible. So for those of you who don't remember what I'm doing, as Thanasis have just given me a very brief introduction, I'm looking at the beginning and the development of glaze productions in medieval Cyprus, and more specifically during the period of the 13th to the 16th century. And for that purpose, I have samples materials from all these sites. The materials recovered from either survey or excavations. And right now, I have analyzed more than 80 samples using scanning electron microscopy and thin section petrography. And based on the results that I have produced actually recently in January in London, and based on the composition, I can tell you I have identified 3 major productions. The first one is this Paphos production, and as you can, this is actually a very nice little group that is very separated from all the other samples I have. And this is the petrographic fabrics of this group. It matches the local geology with a lot of amphiboles, quartzite, and some titanium-rich minerals. And the second group is the Lapithos production as expected. And this is, again, the local fabric, which is a very micaceous fabric, very consistent with the local geology. And then, but as you can see, none of this is actually from the site of production. They are more like the site of consumption and the site of disposition. And the same goes to what I call the Famagusta/Nicosia productions, because the underlying geology of this area is actually quite similar. I may be wrong, if you can correct me later on. But then because it has this bioclastic limestone, which I can see in this fabric, so I call it Famagusta/Nicosia productions. And in all cases, they use highlight glaze. And so thank you very much for your attention. This is the end of my talk. No, I'm just joking. Oh, I can see all the excitement. I'm seeing all the excitement from your face. So now I have identified these 3 major productions. So the big questions that really interest me is, how did the local glaze technology evolve during this time? Because in the literature we know, and I'm not going to dispute that, the earliest production in Cyprus comes from Paphos, which is in the 13th century. And we know this production was quite short-lived. It was just related to the Crusaders and the Frankish rule on the island. And it ended in the 14th century, and it's the time where all these other productions in Famagusta, Lapithos, and possibly Nicosia that started to begin. So what I'm really interested in is the technology used in the late productions in Lapithos and Famagusta, or possibly Nicosia, and derived from a single source of technology in Paphos. That would mean the potters from Paphos, after the collapse of the productions, if they move all the way, so bring with them the technology in these locations, or maybe the potters in Famagusta or Nicosia and Lapithos, they actually have contact with the potters in Paphos, and they learn the technology from them directly. Or did all these later productions come up with their own technologies, because we know glazeware at that time been producing everywhere in the region, or maybe even from other sources, that is from potters that is other from Paphos. But then, as you've said, as I've said, as you can see, all the results that I've just explained, the highlight glaze, local glaze, is actually quite generic. It could be coming from any of the reports that you read from all the analysis of glaze ceramics in the region. So how am I going to go around this? I'm going to, actually what I'm trying to say is an approach that I would like to develop into answering these questions. So all the results I'm presenting is going to be quite rudimentary. It's in a very initial stage. I would like to apply the concept of technological styles and practice theory. It's actually nothing new because a lot of people in the state has been using this to study glaze reproductions in Southwest US. It's actually not a very complicated concept as well. It has a very fancy name, but it's just about how people in the past, in this case, the ancient potters, perform everyday tasks, in this case, producing glazed pottery in a very routine way that would become an everyday task. And how they actually come up with this way of doing things is actually very much conditioned by the society that they're in. So by studying, dissecting every single step in how they produce, reconstructing the style of technology, then actually we may be able to tell something about the society that they belong to, the community that they belong to. So the working hypothesis I have now, it could be completely rubbish in the end, is that the potters from Lepidus and Famagusta and Nicosia productions, if they actually did learn from the potters from the Paphos productions, there should be a high degree of similarity in the technological style. And I'm going to demonstrate, and since it all began with the Paphos production, and I'm going to show you how people in Paphos were producing the glazed ceramics. And in case you're not familiar with the steps of producing glazed ceramics, the first step is obviously they have to prepare the ceramic paste. In this case, they were using the local clay, and I know that they were refining the clay because in this particular collection from the Paphos Theatre, they also found the clay lumps, which has the same mineralogy, but then they're much coarser grains. So, which means that the potters must have refined the clay sources into producing the ceramic paste. And after the ceramic paste was being made, a layer of white slip is being added to the surface for the sgraffito. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mention that I'm going to use sgraffito as an example here because this is the only type of glazeware that I can find in all the assemblages and all the productions in my studies. As you can see, the slip is actually a layer of kaolinite clay with very few fine quartz inclusions. In case you don't know where the quartz are, I've labeled them for you. And after that, the ceramics were being fired. How do I know? Because there is actually only very thin layers of interactions between the glaze and the slip, suggesting that the ceramic and the slip were being biscuit fired first, and then a layer of high lead glaze, which was being made by mixing the lead oxide and quartz onto the pots. So this is how the Paphos production has been producing the glazeware, and the entire method has been quite consistent of all the glaze samples that I've studied within this collection. So this is the baseline, and I'm going to show you how this concept to work by showing you a completely opposite example. And if you remember, I have actually 3 samples that I can't quite really locate it in the production groups chemically and even petrographically. And actually, the samples comes from the survey of the settled and sacred landscape from Cuvinu, the project by our colleagues. And this particular fabric is nothing like all the other fabrics I have seen in these productions. So it's very likely that this one is coming from elsewhere, outside Cyprus. And this actually confirmed by the way how they were actually producing the glazeware, in which for the ceramic paste here, which I don't really know where the source is, but then for the slip, as you can see, it's the white clay, not so much kaolitic clay, I don't really know, it's just a white clay, but with very round, shaped quartz grain, and there are very few of them. And you can see here, what is very special about this one is that they were actually adding a layer of pigment here, and this pigment is actually very high antimony and lead composition, and there's actually what we call the Naples yellow. So, and then obviously after that they apply a layer of clear glaze on top of it. So it's very likely that this particular sample is actually from Italy. Oh, then why do I have to go through all the analysis to tell you this? So now you have to. So you can see clearly, this one is actually belong to a completely different technological style. So there's basically no connections between this piece and the production in Paphos. So this is a very complete opposite example. So what about the samples that I have in my own studies? So let's look at the Lapithos productions. So in this case, the clay obviously was being used, a local clay. The glaze, nothing special because it's very highlight glaze by mixing quartz and then lead oxide. That isn't really much interaction, suggested that biscuit fire was being used first. But as you can see here, the slip is a kaolinitic clay mixed with more quartz inclusions than before, and they're much coarser grain as well. And I've also labeled the quartz for you guys. But this is not the only examples that I can find, only way of making glazed ceramics in the Lapithos productions. This is another example. Again, these are more or less similar, but as you can see here, there's like much more quartz grain, and actually some of the quartz grain are actually contributing, slipping into the glaze. Well, I can't really tell in this case whether they're actually biscuit fired before, or maybe the quartz serve a very specific purpose for sticking the glaze. But then as you can see, there's only very little, and in this case, they're not using kaolinitic clay. They were using a very calcareous clay, which is also white in color. And you can see all the quartz. I spent a lot of time labeling all the quartz. And this is not the only two examples I can find. And there's another examples, as you can see in this one, is much coarser grain and much more angular for this particular samples. And for the Nicosia and Famagusta production, as you can see here, the local clay was being used again, and the same. But in this case, I don't find any quartz here. It's just very fine kaolinitic clay. And there's no, and actually in this one there's no quartz, but then they have apatite in it, which is the same materials that we use to make human bones. So it's very, very different from what we've seen just now. And for this one, this one doesn't have a glaze on it. It's only biscuit fire shirt. But then, because we know from other examples in this particular collections that they were actually prepared to be made into sgraffito, and you can see here, the slip itself is completely just full of quartz grain with very, very clay materials. What I'm trying to say is that by considering like the entire sequence of productions, the steps that shows the greatest variation here is the slip, the way how they are preparing the slip. And I'm arguing that the slip differences we're seeing here is actually not a natural variation, because we know from the Pathos production that the potters are able of producing a very high level of standardization into producing the slip. So any difference we're seeing here is deliberately done by the potters themselves. And then actually the why is it very significant is because the quartz itself serve a very specific and very important technical properties, because they would prevent the kaolinite to shrink, and they would reduce the tension between the slip and then the glaze, and that would prevent the glaze to craze and obviously failure in production. So they actually serve a very specific purpose, one that I cannot really imagine the potters would want to mess with by just being lazy, or one day I just want to be experimental. It's something they learn, they know this is going to be successful to do it. And this is why I'm suggesting that all these variations that we are seeing in the Nicosia Famagusta, as well as the Lapithos production, is actually representative of different production groups, different technical practice within the way of producing sgraffito. And if you are considering like all the other evidence, so what we can see is that the Lapithos productions seems to display a little bit more similarity with the Pathos production in a way that they were using kaolinitic clay and quartz at the same time. But then the similarity ends here, because we can see the way they are preparing is actually quite different. As you can see, there are like a lot of variations in the quartz size and then the quartz shape as well. And such differences I don't really have an explanation now. It could be just like a natural pathway for the evolution of the Pathos production when the potters are moving away, when they reach another new areas, because of ethnographic examples showing that if they want to be part of the society, they have to make slight changes in the way they were doing things. That could be the case, or that could be just showing the case that the people in Lapithos, they have a completely different way, and that has nothing to do with the Pathos potters. But what's interesting is the case of Nicosia and Famagusta, in which I only have 2 samples here, but then the way they're preparing the slip seems to be completely different from the Paphos production, which suggested that it is very likely that they were influenced by a sources that is not from Paphos. And which source it is, I have to refer to other examples in the region, but unfortunately, I don't think anyone is actually quite interested in counting quartz as I am. But what I'm saying is that what I want to develop here is that I'm trying to look at the community of practice, and hopefully I can actually, it could be a very useful, potentially a very useful provenancing tool to put the production, put all these glazeware back into a specific productions. And that would actually give us a more precise idea about the craft organization and how it might have changed through time. So this is what I would like to do and develop more in the future, and hopefully next time I will have even more concrete results to show that it's actually really working. Well, now really, thank you very much.